area are ready. Let's head down for our first/9th round of Standard here from Grand Prix Birmingham. Hello and good morning and welcome to this round 9 of Grand Prix Birmingham, the first round of constructed Standard that we're getting a chance to show on camera for you, and we're going to get a chance to see Philip Franken, who is on red aggro, against Michael Leconte on black-green constructs. Now you might have to rack your brain a little bit to think about what constructs might mean in this metagame, but there are actually quite a few of them lurking around Standard, specifically mostly in Kaladesh. Essentially artifact creatures that don't have any sort of other clear tribe. They pretty much fall into that construct area. Foundry Inspectors making things bigger and cheaper, but Landwire Elves just making everything a little bit more easy to cast here. On the other side of things, Philip Franken, Bomat Courier, we saw it in Legacy yesterday and we're seeing it again in Standard. A bit of an old hand at this point in Standard, and already with its first card under it, the little mailbug there. Another copy of Bomat Courier coming down here. One of the big tools that Mono Red has gained with Dominaria is Goblin Chain Whirler, the 3/3 for 3 with first strike that kills off various 1/1s on either side of things. I'm really going to be interested to see as this format develops how Landwire Elves is going to handle that being around. I mean, being able to kill off 1/1s at almost no cost, a big deal, but maybe Landwire Elves will accelerate things out often enough that it's still a big player in this Standard metagame.
Yes, and Michele, he had only a turn 2 Landwire Elf, so it was already a bit weaker than it could have been, and he blocked, maybe anticipating the Goblin Chain Whirler that Philip could have on turn 3.
Scrap Trawler coming along for on turn 3 from Michael Leconte, and this one does mean that he has the potential to start getting things back from his graveyard. The construct plan just beginning to kick off. Whenever Scrap Trawler or another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you can return an artifact that costs less than that artifact to your hand.
Yeah, you might know this card from the Clarkran Ironworks combo deck in Modern, where it plays an important role in going infinite.
So both of these decks so far showing multi-format all-stars getting involved. Bomat Courier number 2 gradually getting more and more cards underneath it.
And you see no blocks here because Goblin Chain Whirler's effect would be devastating otherwise.
So it looks like there is a copy of the Chain Whirler in hand for Philip Franken. It may be that he still elects to play it out here, even though he's just going to get 1 point of damage directly to Michael here. 3/3 with first strike for 3 is certainly not an embarrassing rate, even with no additional abilities. And the Chain Whirler, it's situated very neatly on the curve and does enough work that it can really make life difficult for opponents. Khan, Scion of Urza coming down here for Michael Leconte, so he has the option of using it to draw cards or indeed to generate constructs. -2 to make at this point a 2/2 construct because there is the one other artifact in play.
And that's what he's going for.
Yeah, immediately ticks down Khan here. Really like the way that Khan has the opportunity to use all of his abilities on the very first turn that he comes into play. I guess that the second ability doesn't do a whole lot, but you can either be drawing cards or protecting your own card and developing your board. And at 4 mana of any color, a very efficient mana cost there.
Yes, it's not broken. It's not like it costs 3 or has too many abilities, but they work really nicely together. You get a bit of protection, a bit of win condition with the -2 ability, and you get card advantage with the other 2.
Now, of course, because we're looking at a mono red deck on the other side of things, there's every reason to think that Philip Franken will have ways of dealing damage directly to Khan here. So 3 loyalty, not completely safe, even with a couple of blockers available right now.
The important part is that these blockers have 2 toughness, so it's not so easy for Michele to... Well, it's not so easy for Philip to kill them with the Goblin Chain Whirler, but at the same time, if Michele decides to block in any way or form, then it looks a bit different.
All right, so both these creatures attacking. Not quite clear which way that they were attacking there.
I would assume that the Chain Whirler for sure is attacking Karn, and probably the Construct as well. The Bomat Courier, which is also a Construct.
And Michael Leconto, he's paid 4 mana for his construct and saved a bit of life in the process. Elects not to block there.
That's a bit surprising. At least blocking Bomber Career, I think, would have been a reasonable line. Your 2/2 construct is not that important, I feel.
Chandra Torch of Defiance coming down here for Philip Franken. Planeswalkers all around and electing to tick up here and using the 2 mana that he generated by doing so to kill off that Scrap Trawler before its text becoming too relevant. This mono red list curving out very neatly here. And Leconto, he's going to have to start stringing a few things together here. Chandra on her own, if left unaccosted, generating a lot of value. And the creatures on the battlefield swinging for a reasonable chunk here. Three mana from Leconto. The full pump fake here, he's clearly got a tricky decision on his hands. Each of these players, they've got a full day's play under their belts with these decks yesterday at 6 and 2. They will need to have a pretty decent Sunday if they're going to make it into the top 8 here. But Black-Green Construct's one of those lists that for Sunday Morning Magic we kind of knew that we wanted to show you something a little bit different, and Black-Green Construct's certainly qualifying. So we have Foundry Inspector, that reducing the cost of artifacts, mean that Metallic Mimic gets to get cast for just a single point of mana. Suddenly a slightly wider board for Leconto.
Yeah, and this is the reason why he wanted to keep that construct around, or as many constructs around as possible. He does get this benefit from having actually mostly artifacts in his deck. He's playing black-green, but apart from the Llanowar Elves and some other cards like Winding Constrictor and Verdurous Gearhulk, he is basically a monocolor. How do you call that even? An uncolored?
A colorless deck.
A colorless deck.
So Franken here, he's got mana, he's got cards in hand, plenty going on here. He can probably afford to be ticking up Chandra. Looks like he's generating mana here. Kicking things off with an Earthshaker Kenra. Only the one creature that he can make sure is unable to block. Elects for Metallic Mimic to get stuck that way. Ultimately, kind of moot point in many respects, as 1 damage to all creatures will be enough to kill the Metallic Mimic anyway.
Yeah, Philip is just crushing here. And look at this Bombard Career. It will have the 4th card under it.
And no cards in hand for Franken, so an easy choice at some point if he wants to draw a lot of cards here. Yeah, Michael Leconto just having to look on. It's crazy in a way that Michael also only just the 1 card left in hand. So in terms of cards in hand, they're in a pretty similar spot. But look at the board of Franken compared to what is going on the other side of things. Just never really been able to get anything going.
Yeah, this has been an absolute slaughter. The Karn dying immediately. The Scrap Trawler not generating any value. Maybe this Walking Ballista can do a little bit of work.
Yeah, getting to pay 5 mana for X being equal to 3 thanks to that Foundry Inspector. A few shots able to be fired off here. I mean, killing the Bomat Courier, it's one of those things that you're not especially happy. Your opponent's still going to draw lots of cards, but they would only draw more if you let it hang around. Earthshaker Kenra, sadly, if you kill it off, it can get brought back very, very easily in this coming turn. Maybe the option is actually to just deal with Chandra and say that that's going to have to be good enough.
Yeah, I don't mind cashing in for 4 cards here. That way Philip makes sure that his next turn is going to be as powerful as possible. There is an alternative line that costs you a mana, but it will yield you an extra card.
A lot of decent ones picked up there. Shock, just one of the options that's immediately available for Philip Franken, having drawn those 4 cards. Yeah, if you're Leconto here, there's just so many different axes that you have to work on. Those Goblin Chain Whirlers, they've kind of doubled up as being spells while also being efficient creatures in this first game that we're seeing of Standard here on Sunday at Grand Prix Birmingham. All right, 3 counters down from Walking Ballista, all with the 1 target. And when Foundry Inspector gets shot down, that enough to end this first game. Michael Okonta can read the writing on the wall here, goes to his sideboard and tries to find a way of somehow winning this matchup back a little bit after sideboarding. I can't help but think that he will have been ready for some degree of red decks in this format. Red decks were good before the printing of Dominaria. It doesn't feel to me like the existence of a few additional cards for them could be anything other than good for them in total.
Yeah, it looks like it's still a very important player in this metagame, but to be fair, Philip had a really strong start here. Michele's deck didn't really cooperate as well, so let's see if it changes after sideboarding.
Now, one of the cards that I want to talk about that in the red deck I do feel has changed in value, and it's been around for a while, is Soulscar Mage. Soulscar Mage converting non-combat damage into -1/-1 counters. There weren't too many instances that you were throwing around too many -1/-1 counters in Standard previously. Yes, it came up. Of course, there were ways of shrinking Hazaret and so on and so forth. But it felt like a just sort of a by-the-by small adjustment to what your deck was ultimately trying to do.
The reason you were playing Soulscar Mage was because you didn't have enough 1-drops. You wanted it for curve reasons, and sometimes prowess would trigger, and you would have a relevant creature on the battlefield.
Now, all of a sudden, with the existence of Goblin Chain Whirler, you've got this free damage that's just being thrown around all over the place. And that non-combat damage means that there are lots of -1/-1 counters being put on creatures if you end up with your Soulscar Mage working alongside Goblin Chain Whirler. And that truly is relevant on a lot of board states. The 1 damage would, in many cases, be wasted against a lot of larger creatures where it's simply damage, but when it gets turned into -1/-1 counters, you've got a nice little combo that this red deck has not had to do any work to get there. That's just a freebie that it happens to have picked up. A card that it was already playing, just simply getting better thanks to the printing of Goblin Chain Whirler.
Absolutely. You can play it on curve, just play the Chain Whirler on 3 with the Soulscar Mage and play. You can also delay things and just hold a Soulscar Mage for the moment you draw the Chain Whirler to get this effect.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Powerful option. We see these players just finishing up their sideboarding here. They'll be shuffling up for game 2 soon enough. In terms of the red deck, I don't think that aside from the addition of Goblin Chain Whirler, there have been gigantic sea changes in what it's trying to do. If you've played red before, you kind of know, all right, it's 20-0. Let's see how fast we can achieve it. I guess one question for me is how reliant it might be on Hazaret, given that maybe its curve has moved up a tiny bit.
Yeah, but Hazaret I think is still just too good not to play. This list is playing 3 of them, and I think that's a good number, and you don't want less. I think also even playing 4 is not out of the question.
Now, we do have the standings from yesterday, just so we can bring you up to speed on where we sit in the format. 9 players on 8-0, Davide Capello, Marco Del Pivo, Klaus Gruber, Ashley Barden, Mark McGovern, Mario Rodriguez Lopez, Sean Lynch, Giancarlo Pinto, and Alexander Hugel. But once we get down to the points just below that full perfect record, there are some big names there. Martin User, he's the 13th ranked player in the world right now. Jean-Emmanuel Depras, Petr Sahurek, Simon Nielsen, all these guys just 1 win off the pace, and that puts them very much in the running to have a good day today on day 2 of this GP. Remy Fortier, another player on 7-1, Marcio Carvalho, also on 7-1, Elliot Bousseau there as well. And we have got some really cool deck lists that we've seen from some of these players that really do open up this standard metagame quite a bit. The addition of Teferi to the mix, the addition of Khan to the mix, even a few players doing cool things with Mono Black we've heard rumblings about around the room. We'll hopefully get a chance to bring you that on camera soon enough. this standard metagame, it's definitely had a big old shift thanks to Dominaria. All right, these players now drawing their opening hands, seeing what they can do for this game too. Lambor Elves potentially on the play here for Michael Leconto if he's got that green mana. Looks like he is keeping his 7, so we are off to the races here for game 2. Turn 1 Lambor Elves, exactly where you want it, and if there is a shock in Philip Franken's hand, the age-old plan of bolt the bird, or for lack of a better term, burn the elf, shall we say, still remains a powerful one. As it stands, though, Bomat Courier attacking in. We saw Michael Leconto chump blocking with Lambor Elves in game 1. That kind of a concession to the fact that he wasn't accelerating anything out too scarily on the very early turns of the game. He didn't have Lambor Elves on 1 there.
Yeah, but also he got a trade with Bomat Courier, which I think is a good trade to make, especially when you know that Goblin Chain Roller is in your opponent's deck. Four Chain Rollers are in your opponent's deck.
Winding Constrictor coming down here. That one of the least colorless cards in Michael Leconto's deck. Both green and black mana needed, but it does make many of his other cards much, much more powerful. He has Walking Ballista, what we saw. Verdurous Gearhulk seems like a reasonable assumption from this green-black list.
Winding Constrictor is one of the key cards in this deck. I mean, it has seen better days even, but it's still the reason why we're seeing such a monocolored deck play a black-green card. And there's actually a thing related to Soulscar Mage. So we just mentioned how good this card has become in mono red thanks to the Chain Roller. Now Winding Constrictor doubles counters that, or it doesn't double, but it adds a counter whenever another counter would be put on a permanent. So there is a danger that Winding Constrictor can even backfire.
Yeah, it's something that there was a point in time where Winding Constrictor existed. Then with Amonkhet, there were all sorts of interesting cards that let you put -1/-1 counters on your own creatures. And you would never see the twain in the same deck because the synergy there was kind of the wrong way around, I guess. So Metallic Mimic coming down, followed up by a Walking Ballista with X being equal to 1, but the Metallic Mimic had named Construct, that meaning that it was going to come into play and gain a counter from Metallic Mimic, increase to 2, and then X being equal to 1, increase to 2, ultimately 4 counters on that Walking Ballista. Have I got that right there, Simon?
I'm a little bit confused. I thought it would be 3, but
I mean, if the Metallic Mimic trigger is putting a counter on,
is it a trigger though? I thought it was a very similar effect to the Winding Constrictor. Maybe I got the wording wrong. Or maybe we can just get a judge to confirm how this interaction works. But I mean, Michele should know how this is going on day 2.
So Karizev coming along here, Ragavan, the monkey, joining the captain there. So attacks here from Philip Franken. Each and every turn here as Philip Franken is attacking, he's constantly threatening Goblin Chain Whirler post-combat, making some of the blocking decisions just a little bit more complicated. As things stand here, it's actually a Magma Spray post-combat to kill off Lambor Elves that he's going with here. Doesn't really want to see Michael Leconto getting too much additional mana going on because we've already seen that there's the potential for big Walking Ballistas, there's potential for other pretty potent explosive plays from the black-green deck. So killing off the mana creature, even if he's having to leave it a little bit later than he might ideally have wanted, still worth doing. But Leconto here just figuring out exactly what he wants to do with his turn. We are just double-checking with the judges the exact way that the Metallic Mimic Walking Ballista interaction goes down. Winding Constrictor and Metallic Mimic alongside that Walking Ballista.
Legacy players, welcome to this tournament. I'm here with your handlers today, and we play 5 rounds.
And we have Simon Gertsen. He's been checking out exactly what's been going on in the feature match area with regards to this slightly unusual interaction.
Hello, Tim.
It looks like the judges are just trying to figure out the details of our Metallic Mimic, Walking Ballista, Winding Constrictor pile-up, if you will.
It's a little bit of a convoluted situation, and this is day 2, so you would expect this interaction not to be on the battlefield for the first time, but it's still, I think, important to make sure that everything is going correctly here.
Philip Franken doesn't appear too worried. I guess that the worst case scenario for him is that, yes, that Walking Ballista does end up with 4 and now indeed 3 counters.
It's not a huge deal either way. It's and both of these players are actually quite relaxed about it. It's just, in the end, also important for us to know the board state correctly.
Yeah, I mean, we're in one of those spots where we're still getting a feel for how this format works in this this new standard world. And if you're planning on playing black-green constructs, if it does work that you get to get extra counters, that's something you never want to miss out on.
Absolutely, yes.
So the judge is just going through exactly what's going on here. Conveniently, of course, we also have our spotters doing live totals that are able to relay to the judges exactly what's going on. They have as much information to work with as a judge could possibly hope for in terms of making a good and clear ruling. You can see Jean-Emmanuel Deprat also in our feature match area this round. We may get a chance to see a little bit of him playing out his games once this match is completed. It looks like the judge is struggling a little bit with this one, just figuring out the details of how they want it all to be applied, whether or not there's been any sort of strategic decisions impacted by the number of counters on that Walking Ballista.
The way I see it is that Metallic Mimic and Winding Constrictor should work very similar to each other. They will both try to add an additional counter to the Walking Ballista, but maybe there's some weird interaction that makes it work differently. I'm sure that, for example, if Metallic Mimic was a trigger, yes, then the Walking Ballista for 1 would come into play with 2, then it would trigger and it would become 4 from the Metallic Mimic. But that's not the wording, so that's why we have to clear this up. You said Jerry Thompson was contemplating playing black-green constructs as well?
Yes, I don't know the details of that list, but when talking to him on Friday, he was working his way around the room, playing a few side events, getting a feel for what's going on here, maybe getting over a little bit of jet lag. And he said that it was one of the lists that he had been considering. Jerry, he is working with a team for the Pro Tour, but there's enough time before the Pro Tour that he's not too shy about coming along and playing some events, getting the reps in against a whole variety of different players, just so that he can make sure that he feels as well prepared as he can be when it comes to the Pro Tour. Yes,
and also it prevents you from doing too much of in-breed testing. You really have to get out there, you have to compete against other players, in this case even from another continent.
Yes. I'm sure he doesn't mind also the prospect of going to a GP, potentially doing rather well and walking away with another trophy.
Oh, of course not.
I'm not quite sure where Jerry finished up yesterday. I know that he picked up a loss to Anand Kare, who ended up 7-1 on the weekend thus far. He's, of course, playing on day 2 here, hoping to parlay that 7-1 finish on day 1 into a potential top 8.
This is taking a bit longer than I expected.
Okay, so they have determined that yes, it should have been 3 counters that went on the Walking Ballista. So in that regard, we're correct. We figured that one out. The tricky bit, and the reason they've actually got a level 3 in who is making a final ruling on this, is the time that passed between the issue taking place and where we now find ourselves in the game, whether or not too much has gone on in the board state to be able to straightforwardly fix it, or if actually this is one where they can just go, all right, fine, that Walking Ballista's got one for your counter. It seems to me like both these players pretty chill about the situation. Like, they just want to make sure it comes to the correct resolution, and I'm pretty confident that Riccardo Tessitore here, our red shirt in the area, will be able to get this all sorted out soon enough. In terms of the board state going on here, Philip Franken, he's not had quite the powerhouse start that he was able to get in game one. Michael Leconte hoping to win things back a little bit here in the second game. He did, of course, have the benefit of being on the play in the second game. Lamoire Elves, it had a small impact, but not maybe as much impact as it could have done. But the Winding Constrictor alongside Walking Ballista, tale as old as time. We love how those two work together.
Okay, it does look like there's some amount of fixing going on.
Looks like we're actually winding back a little step or two here. A card going back on the top of Michael Leconte's deck here. So, quite an impressive amount of winding back when you get right down to it going on here.
I like that judges are now able and willing to wind back more, and this is exactly the moment where we had the 4 counters being put on the ballista, and then Michele shot the Bomber Courier with it, which is why we saw it with 3 counters all the time. But now I think this is the fix that the judge is applying here.
So we literally saw the judges going, let's build a board of exactly how things looked at the point that there was a rules infraction, and then let's change the one thing that was the problem, which was the number of counters on the Walking Ballista. Now we are at a perfect game state, and play can continue.
Yeah, and the way that this is solved is actually by letting Philip, who had drawn a card, just put 1 card of his hand back onto the top of his library, and because he's tapped out, it's basically, it doesn't matter. Well, he can even if you cannot determine the card that he drew, it's not too relevant for the game state, because he will have access to it anyway next turn.
All right, we can see that these players just sort of taking a little breath. That was a bit of a hefty ruling as it turned out. I mean, neither of these players, I don't think it's going to have impacted this game in a gigantic way, but obviously important to get these things correct.
I think it's also important for Michele to know how his cards work from
Absolutely.
now on. You don't want to put more counters on your Walking Ballistas or on your other creatures than you are allowed to.
So these guys will, of course, have a bit of a time extension. That was best part of 10 minutes that we had there on the judges doing their thing. And all of a sudden, look, this different world with Walking Ballistas and 3 counters is also a different world with a Scavenger Grounds rather than a mountain being put into play. I guess that the attack that was kind of a pseudo bluff on there being a Goblin Chain Whirler, given that it ended up being followed up by a Magma Spray, now all of a sudden Philip Franken taking a different line because he knows that his opponent knows that there wasn't a Chain Whirler post-combat. Doesn't need to bluff the Chain Whirler, instead playing Scavenger Grounds, and we will see exactly what he wants to attack with here. All creatures getting stuck in here. An extra card going under the Bomber Courier. Ragavan joining Karizev. Leconte just taking the damage here.
Just like in game 1, he never blocked. Well, one time with his Llanowar Elves, I believe. But otherwise, he was really protecting his board state. He has such a big benefit from having a big board that he's willing to just go down to, let's say, 10 life, and then his bigger creatures will just take over.
Now, Verdurous Gearhulk, this generates a lot of counters thrown around. So it itself is a construct, so it will come into play with a +1/+1 counter. There's also going to be +1/+1 counters going on all over the place thanks to Winding Constrictor.
I'm glad we got that one counter on the Walking Ballista fix. That would have
Totally
had
worth it.
a huge impact on the
I mean,
on the
it's a
game.
funny one because ultimately it didn't appear to have very much impact on that exact game. However, the notion to me that we might see the world and its wife casting, like playing this Black-Green Constructs deck incorrectly due to having seen it work one way on camera at an event is still a very big deal to me. I'm happy that we've successfully figured out how that works for going forward, both for Michael and for anyone else that's considering playing Constructs.
Exactly. Every viewer and us as well. I think the integrity of the tournament is important enough. And if you start trying to guess how impactful a certain infraction is on the game state, you are digging yourself a hole. Because then what about the one time where it is actually the deciding difference, or where it's more impactful than you predicted?
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing that I'm all for everyone having a chilled out time and having a good game of Magic and being able to enjoy themselves and being able to sort of not sweat the details too much if they choose to about their gameplay decisions. You know, if you decide to block, if you decide to not block, and you know you decide that taking that extra 1 point of damage doesn't matter, that's a choice that you've made. However, playing the cards correctly as written, if you start blurring the lines on that a little bit, all of a sudden at some point someone's going to realize that they've lost a game that they should have won and feel awful about it.
Yeah. It's a complex game with tricky rules and tricky interactions. So I don't fault anyone for this. Michele missed it or didn't know it. Philip also, as the opponent, missed it, and we got it cleared up.
All right, so on to game 3 here. It'll be Philip Franken on the play for the deciding game. The play draw does seem to be relatively important in this matchup. Red deck simply looking to get off to a quick start, and the Black-Green Constructs deck able to really benefit from an early Lamoire Elves, powering things out a little bit quicker on turns 2+.
Michele Loconte is a good turn behind Philip Franken when it comes to development, which is why Land of Elves is so important. But when Philip is on the play, I think Bomet Courier is amazing, and Goblin Chain Roller is a much bigger threat to Land of Elves than on the draw. Yeah,
we will see whether or not Philip Franken needs to assemble any big synergies here, or if he can simply just rely on the raw power level of his cards. I mean, that's one of the things that's kind of convenient about a lot of mono red decks, is that everything's working to a very straightforward goal. The synergies don't need to be baked in too hard to feel like you're having a good draw. It's not about assembling combos particularly very often. If you play out your cards, they're all naturally trying to do the same thing, and you're very straightforwardly able to deploy them. And that means that taking mulligans a little bit more easy. On the other side of things, for a Black-Green Constructs deck, I can easily imagine if you draw 3 Winding Constrictors but nothing that's putting counters on, then you're casting 2/3s for 2, which are fine at best. Meanwhile, if you draw all your mana acceleration but not your big cards, it can be a little bit awkward. When you get those synergies, it can be absolutely phenomenal, but there's a little bit more variance in the draws there because maybe the raw power level of your cards individually isn't quite as high.
Traditionally speaking, if you are this one turn slower than your opponent, you're actually in a good spot. You're actually favored because you should have the time for your bigger creatures to take over. Now, I think Goblin Chain Whirler is so powerful that it does change this equation a little bit. And in game 1, we saw how Philip can basically just steamrolled Michele, who was playing powerful cards, but they seemed almost irrelevant.
And the interesting thing that we've seen a little bit is the kind of the gravity that the Chain Whirler exerts on opposing decisions, that if I attack with a whole bunch of creatures and I've got triple red up, or even double red up, and I've not played my land yet, then I can relatively strongly threaten that that chain whirler might come along and mean that you're less inclined to block than perhaps you might otherwise have been.
Both players with slow starts here. No turn 2 play for Philip, no turn 2 for Michele, maybe?
Does
oh, wow.
have a 1-1 walking ballista. I'm not sure how much I like the 1-1 walking ballista here.
I don't like it. Unless you want to draw out a Goblin chain roller.
As things stand, Philip Franken doesn't have the triple red in play on turn 3 to be able to cast a chain whirler, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see him off the walking ballista relatively soon. Soulscar Mage coming down here as a 1-2. It is safe from the ballista unless there's a few extra counters getting thrown around sometime soon.
Yeah, quite unlikely for 3 mana. Michele is also having some mana issues, it looks like. Winding Constrictor in hand. But no black sources right now.
Now, Scrap Trawler working quite nicely with the walking ballista. It's always in the graveyard going to be an artifact with a converted mana cost of 0, meaning that very straightforward to get back from the graveyard.
Not if it gets Magma Sprayed, though. That seems like a clean answer here to Scrap Trawler.
I mean, I guess that the issue is that in response, like the Scrap Trawler is the one that's going to get Magma Sprayed here, because in response to a Magma Spray on Walking Ballista, you can remove the counter to level 1 to something and ensure that it does still go to the graveyard. So it's actually a Lightning Strike on the Scrap Trawler. That enough for the Walking Ballista to get sacrificed, knowing that the Walking Ballista will then come back.
Yeah.
This makes a little bit more sense of the turn 2 Walking Ballista to me.
Yes, it explains the turn 2 Walking Ballista, but it doesn't explain why Philip uses a Lightning Strike instead of a Magma Spray. Of course, he used his mana more effectively, but I think that wasn't worth it.
All right, so we have a Thrashing Brontodon down for Michael LeConte. Big old creature, can potentially deal with artifacts and enchantments. Not too many enchantments to worry about just here, but in principle, if Michael really wanted to, he could deal with the 1-1 Bomat Courier. We there see the Soulscar Mage interaction with a Braid. 3 damage turning into 3 -1/-1 counters on the Brontodon, meaning that all of a sudden it's a much less exciting creature, and in some respects it becomes far more enticing to think about sacrificing it in order to off a Bomat Courier here.
Yeah, but Philip still has to spend a spell on it if he wants it to die here. The Brontodon is still threatening to destroy an artifact.
I mean, it's not an exciting play, but yes, we will actually use 2 removal spells to deal with the 1 creature from LeConte's side of things. And if you're Michael, you have to feel kind of okay about that. You've got yourself a 2-for-1.
I agree. I think there might have been a better line where you attack first, and then you see if Michele blocks with his Brontodon. Then when and if he blocks, a single removal spell will be sufficient.
And because the removal spell will also reduce the power of that Brontodon, it may well be a straightforward 1-for-1. Walking Ballista coming back down again as just a 1-1.
Yeah, probably just being used to deal with that Bomat Courier. And we have to talk about it, Tim. Scavenger Grounds. 2 Scavenger Grounds in your mono red deck that's trying to cast Chain Rollers.
Feeling the pinch on this one. Yeah, if that Scavenger Grounds were a mountain, it would be a very big deal. 2 copies of Goblin Chain Whirler in hand. Soulscar Mage interacting very nicely with the Chain Whirler, though worth noting, I guess, that Soulscar Mage doesn't interact quite so nicely with Magma Spray because it's the Magma Spray needs to have damaged creatures to be able to exile them, and Soulscar Mage converting that damage into -1/-1 counters. And knock on top of the deck there for Michael LeConte. He's not shy about showing that he's not happy with this draw. 3 forests both of these players, in spite of not having very heavy color requirements, are finding themselves a little bit squeezed here based on the lands that they've drawn thus far. Scrap Heap Scrounger, a 3-2 that can't block, that at the moment, once it goes to the graveyard, won't be coming back. And actually, this is going to be one of those moments where the Magma Spray is a little awkward.
Yeah, but this is exactly the mistake that the players are also making. So, just to explain what's going on. With Soulscar Mage in play, Magma Spray doesn't deal 2 damage, but it puts 2-1/-1 counters on it. Then it resolves, leaving the Scrap Heap Scrounger in play as a 1/0, and then state-based effects are checked, making the Scrap Heap Scrounger die instead of it going to exile.
And I guess it says
Oh.
if that creature would die this turn, exile it.
So actually that's actually correct. Sorry, then I was just wrong on that interaction.
Apologies on that one. Another Scrap Heap Scrounger coming along here. Maybe this one will last a little longer than its compatriot, though. Looking at what's going on with Philip Franken's hand, I'm not convinced on that front.
Okay.
Pump of the fist there as the third red mana source finally coming along for Philip Franken here. He will be able to whirl some chains if he so chooses, but an abundance of options available to him here. No blocking going to be going on by that Scrap Heap Scrounger, regardless of the threat of any kind of chain dancing going on from Franken's side of the battlefield. I mean, the convenient thing here is we've got our combo. A -1/-1 counter getting put on that Scrap Heap Scrounger thanks to Goblin Chain Whirler. Michael LeConte, he doesn't get a -1/-1 counter, he just loses a life.
I like how these players are really enjoying themselves here. You can tell that even with the little mishap that we witnessed, there's no bad blood, no bad feelings.
This is, I mean, you could call this a construct theme deck. You could also just call it a scrap theme deck. Between your Scrap Troll, your Scrap Heap Scrounger, this is a scrappy little number that we've got in the hands of Michael LeConte here. And a suspicious looking attack here from that Scrounger. If Goblin Chain Whirler blocks, then First Strike will definitely work in his favor, but it will mean that we've got an artifact going to the graveyard, meaning that Scrap Trawler triggers and that Walking Ballista comes back. I don't know really whether or not that block was actually needed for Philip Franken here. All right, are we going to see another Chain Whirler coming down here? It certainly means that there can be more attacking going on for Philip Franken. So you'll notice our clock going up rather than down there. That just the extra time from rulings just being put on so that we don't have any kind of mismatch in terms of the amount of time left on this round. I think that there's every possibility that we may see this match completed even in the 7 minutes or so on regulation time, but we'll find out soon enough.
Yeah, that's always the greatest fear for the judge staff, if the extra time is actually being used or not.
It's the sort of thing that in a small tournament, if there's one game that happens to get an extension, you're not holding up too many people. But there were over 1,000 people in day one of this GP. Obviously day two, a little bit smaller, but still every potential for things to get held up just a touch. Michael LeConte going to 8 life off that set of attacks there.
He top decked a Black Source, so he has that going for him.
I mean, if you're going to top deck a Black Source, Blooming Marsh, not exactly the one that you're looking for. Blooming Marsh. And here we have just the Metallic Mimic coming down for LeConte, and there's a good chance that it's not going to survive the turn here.
There's a good chance that Michele will not survive the turn. 2, 5, 7, 8.
And casting the Abrade there did mean that we got some prowess triggers, and that enough for the handshake. Look at Philip Franken, absolutely pleased as punch there to be able to get through this first round of the day. Really sets the tone for your day, how your round one goes. And Philip Franken's mono red aggro deck able to get things going there. Slightly shaky draws in the middle, perhaps, for Michael Aconte. But the power of Goblin Chain Whirler is something that there's been a lot of talk about it. It's lovely to actually see it in action, and the red deck doing what red decks have been doing since pretty much the start of the game, killing opponents from whichever life total they choose to try and work with. And that the end of our main match here. We did get a chance to see Black-Green Constructs. Must be noted, Black-Green Constructs, not a deck that we've seen loads of in our Day 2 metagame. We will be bringing you more details of that in the next round or two. Don't want to spoil too much, but there are a number of decks that are kind of new, interesting, a little bit different, that we're going to be making an effort to bring you on camera in the next few rounds, just to give you a feel for what this Dominaria standard looks like. I know that I, for one, am very intrigued to find out about this mono black deck that I've been hearing rumors about, bringing back the days of Cabal Coffers and getting cool things going. We'll get a chance to see that soon enough, and of course plenty of other magic right after these messages.